Righto. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming along this evening and making the time to attend. Hopefully we'll start getting into some of the nitty-gritty this evening, David. Okay, so this is webinar 2, and we've got David Hardwick with us, and today we're going to talk about soil tests and soil health, using soil tests to monitor soil health, and organic matter, carbon to nitrogen ratio, soil pH, and sodic soils. So once again, like these webinars are supported by the Southern Gulf NRM through funding from the federal government's National Landcare program. So it's both projects that I work with, which is Profitable Producers Creating Healthy Landscapes, and the EB Smart Farm project. So once again, like Shane, you're the newbie to the meeting. We've got a fairly casual style, and yeah, just imagining that we're all in a room together. So I want everyone to interact, ask questions, especially as we're getting into more of the detail. And then we can, like we're aiming to finish at 7:30, but like if discussion goes further, I'm happy with that. So we'll just see how it turns out. And if you wouldn't mind muting yourself unless you're asking questions or discussing points. And just to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and will be, loaded to our website or, or sent out to people that request it. So if everyone's happy with that. Okay, so now I'll hand over to David. Oh, and thank you, Nigel. Good to see you here too. That's great. All yours. Thanks, David. And I've already got you set up. You should be able to share your screen whenever you're ready.
Oh, good. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, g'day, everyone. I'll just set up my screen a little bit. Hopefully you can see that initial picky there. What's going on here? I'll get the chat going too. So if you need to punch something into chat while we're going, feel free to do that. But yeah, you can just demute and ask a question. Put your hand up like that if you need to, just so I catch your eye. It catches my eye because I've got 2 screens running here, and that way I can stop and we can talk through whatever issue you want to talk through. Yeah, we'll probably go for 10-15 minutes longer than the norm, just because soil health is a bit of a big topic, but I'll aim to get through it as close as I can to an hour, but I'm happy to go longer if we have questions, no problems. And so today is really about using your soil tests to see whether, if there's any limiting factors that are stopping plant growth that are not nutrients related, so not phosphorus or sulfur or nitrogen, but other things that are maybe limiting plants to grow. And so we call that soil health. So I better jump straight in. So last time, just a quick refresher, last time we talked about why you'd use soil tests, the key things to remember when using a test, and we just started practicing using a soil test to look at soil type. So they're just to sort of warm ourselves up. Excuse me. So the 3 things we're using a soil test for is to understand your soil type. And I remember you might have 1 soil type or you might have 10. Then the second reason you'd use a soil test is to help you manage soil health, and that's what we're going to cover tonight. And we'll talk about fertility next time, phosphorus, sulfur, particularly those 2 next week. So, and the other thing we did, I pulled apart a soil test. If you remember last time, we pulled apart a soil test, and all soil tests should have those 5 elements to them that I've just got there. They should have indicators on them, a method. How did they measure the pH, or how did they measure the organic matter? What method did they use? The unit of measurement, did they use grams per kilogram, or parts per million, or kilograms per hectare, or percentage? What was the method, the measurement, unit of measurement? And then obviously you get your results. And on some soil tests, they also have a benchmark or target to guide you. So just as a really quick refresher on that, I'll grab a soil test and we'll just pull one up just to go over that again. I've got this little soil test up here. So you can see here that all soil tests should have the indicators you're looking at. So tonight we'll be looking at organic matter. So they've got the indicator organic matter. They tell you how it's measured. In this case, they do a calculation. The method is a calculation. And then they also give you the unit of measurement, percentage, if everyone can see that. Up here for sulfur, they're doing milligrams per kilogram is the unit of measurement. And then they give us the number, the results that we paid for, 10, in this case, organic matter is 10%. And no, that's not a North Queensland grazing soil. And then they give you the benchmarks over here. And on the test that you guys have got for this soil project, they've put the benchmarks on these things called indicative guidelines. If you remember, I think we sort of touched on them a bit in the first webinar. So we're looking at those indicative guidelines, and you can see here that EAL, the way that this lab lay it out, is that they give you different guidelines depending on your texture. Heavy clay or light sand, the numbers might change a bit just depending on soil type. Whereas another soil test from a different lab, I'll grab one quickly, this one here, you can see here, this is a test from Inside Tech or Landmark. You can see here they give the sort of the range in a different way, the benchmarks over here, and they give you colourful bar charts to tell you when you should spend money. So if you're in the red, you've got to spend money. So yeah, that's basically a bit of a summary. Different tests are laid out differently, but they all should have those 5 elements on them. So with that in mind, we looked at soil type last time, and in particular, we looked at total fertility. If you remember, we're looking at your tests for you guys. We looked at the total fertility on your soils. So here's the Julia Creek soils. And if we go down to near the bottom of your test, you've got these totals. Towards the bottom of your test is the totals. And like if I just pick on sulfur, this soil's got a total sulfur of 60, this one less than 50, this one 930. So you can see here 3 different soil types across the north there where you guys are, but very different total sulfur levels. And that will obviously influence the grazing behavior in animals and a whole range of other things as well. And then we looked at texture. So we had a look at basic texture, which is a little bit further up on that test. And they just describe it as clay loam or clay or sand or whatever. And the final thing we looked at was this thing, I'll just go back and check, which I called the soils colloid or the CEC. So hopefully everyone can remember that CC, which without going too much into it, but on your soil tests, if you go up sort of about 2/3 of the way down the test, depending on whether you've printed it out on 1 page or 2, you'll see this thing, cation exchange capacity. So hopefully you guys that I can't see your face because you can't get that video connection, just give me the thumbs up if you're following along so far, because I know I'm jumping straight into it. Thanks, Kieran. Colin, Shane, you're new, but hopefully you'll keep going. Yeah, Lockie, thanks for that. But yeah, that way I just know that you're keeping up. So I'm just doing a bit of a refresh on last time. And that CEC, or which is also known as the soil colloid, 27 in that first soil there, 8 in the second. So you can see it's kind of, and 54 over here, whoever saw that is. I'll scroll up and have a look. That's row K, that's Redland Park. That's got the largest charge, or CEC, what we call the soils colloid. So you can see we looked at those 3 key aspects of your soil, and that colloid, if you're in grazing, there's not much you're going to do about it, but if you're in cropping, the size of that CEC does influence things like fertilizer rates, or if you're trying to change pH or add gypsum or something that sometimes people do in cropping situations, that's important for that. So that's what we looked at last time. We just started practicing using a soil test. Today we're going to keep going, so I'm going to jump into the next main topic, which is probably one of the most important reasons you'd use a soil test. In my opinion, and in experience over a long time doing agronomy and extension around soils, most people use a soil test to see how much money they can spend on fertilizers. My personal opinion is you should be spending as least money as possible. Not saying don't buy fertilizers or whatever, but the more important thing that soil tests help you with is, what condition is my soil in? Is my soil in good condition, or does it have some limiting factors, that it's the asset's not working. And that's what we mean by soil health. So soil health, using your soil test to assess soil health is probably more important than using it for nutrient management, because you can have all the nutrients in the world, but if you haven't got plant roots growing, they're not going to access those nutrients, if that kind of makes sense. So let's jump in and have a look at soil health. And I'll start by asking this question here. If you're going to buy a second-hand ute from someone on Gumtree, not me, of course, because I'm Dodgy Dave, what will be on your checklist to check when you inspect the vehicle? So you're going to buy this vehicle, you've rung me up, you're looking for a vehicle, and you've said, I want to buy a ute, and I've said I've got one in good nick, and then you've come to have a look at it, and this is what you've rocked up to. But what are some of the things that are going to be in your mental checklist when you're coming to inspect the vehicle? So anyone have a go? Mechanically sound. Well, Colin, I told you on the phone it was mechanically sound, mate. And you get there and you lift the bonnet up and you can see there's no, not even an engine in it. So, but it's carbon neutral, so it's all good. Yep. What else are you going to be looking at? So for me, Colin, I want to know specifics. So I want to know things like, is there black smoke, or is the gearbox really making an untoward noise when I practice shifting the gears? So we go through a bit of a checklist: body condition, kilometers. Thanks, Lockie. So yeah, we go through this checklist on what we want the vehicle to be in good order or not. So number of wheels, body condition, black smoke, oil leaks. You've got a mental list in your head. The key thing is you're not going to worry about fuel in the tank, because you can sort that out later. The main thing is the vehicle in working order? Because you can put fuel in it, that's a second issue. But you want to know, is it mechanically sound? Does it have enough wheels to get me home? Does it have a windscreen, or do I have to wear goggles? So no matter what type of vehicle it is, whether it's a truck or a 12-tonner or a Subaru Brumby, it doesn't really matter. It needs to be in working order for that vehicle to do a job for you. It's an asset, and for it to do a job. So if you think about utes, the reason or farm vehicles, the reason we want to do a job, they have to do key things like get you to town and back, carry loads, maybe go long distance to Townsville or Brisbane or Sydney or wherever you are in the States, carry passengers, tow things. So it needs to be able to do things, that vehicle, that asset. And the second really important thing, which will be really relevant for soils and soil health, is it needs to be able to do those things reliably. Hence, people often buy Toyotas, in both easy and challenging times. So it's really easy to grow grass in a good year. Everyone can grow grass in a good year, but in the hard years, being able to grow grass in a tough year, that's the challenge. And yes, rainfall, you need rainfall, but you also need that rain to go effectively into the ground and have perennial grass roots that can access that rainfall. So having a soil in good condition helps you with those tough years. So just think about your soil like that asset. It's an asset in your business. It's one of the most important assets or capital assets in your business. When you buy land, when you buy property, basically you're spending money on the topsoil and vegetation, and then obviously the fencing and the agricultural capital. But it's part of what we call your property's natural capital, your business's natural capital. And so you need to maintain that topsoil in good condition. You need to keep it in good condition if you're going to be productive in the long term. And soil health is really another way of saying a soil asset in good condition. So it's not muck and mystery. It's just sometimes the word's used very broadly, but it means a soil in working order that can carry specific jobs, do specific jobs for you. And I'm just going to, before we get the soil test out, I'm just going to cover really clearly what jobs that soil asset does when it's in good condition. Just get that thing up there a bit. So the first thing it does is, I'll just jump over those, is it can capture and store water. So when rain falls, it either goes into the ground or it runs off. There's just two choices. It goes in the ground or runs off. And obviously the best place to put it is in the ground. And if you look at some of the work that was done on rotational grazing versus set stocking, the early trial work in the 2000s done by Dr. Judy Earle and Professor Lewis Kahn in northern South Australia, they saw a 10-fold increase in water infiltration. That's 10-fold in about 3 years. by changing grazing management. So that's a massive improvement in the soil function. And that's in about a 400 mil rainfall zone. So that aggregation and the pores and all that changed quite quickly, and that improved the functioning of that asset. The second thing that topsoil does as an asset for you is it cycles your nutrients. So you can have a really high level of phosphorus in your soil, but if it's not cycling, we may as well go and live on Mars because you're not getting a hold of it for the plants. So most nutrients on Earth are in the minerals in your soil, and the topsoil, a healthy topsoil, cycle those nutrients really effectively. And this is a trial out of the US where they cut grass. I'll just get my squiggly going. They cut grass to 2 inches, sorry, it's in inches, 2 inches every week, and a perennial plant, and then 2 inches every 2 weeks. And this one, they gave it more rest or recovery time, and they cut it to 2 inches every 4 weeks. And you can really clearly see the increase in root volume in where they gave it more recovery. Perennial grasses love recovery because they build root systems, which is their survival strategy, so they can last you 50 years. You've got to let them have that recovery though. And you can see what the second thing that means, apart from the perennial grass persisting, is that it will drive nutrient cycling. It's got a deeper topsoil, more carbon, more life, and that's what drives the cycling in the soil. So they may have the same level of nutrients, but this one will be cycling them more effectively. So that's the second thing that healthy topsoil does. The third really important thing is that it just provides a good environment for plant growth. You know, the soil structure allows roots to really go down deep, and they can take up a balanced diet of nutrients. Basically, they can feed themselves in a balanced way. The fourth one, which is not so relevant in grazing landscapes, but certainly if you're in cropping, is that when you have a healthy landscape, healthy soil, you have diversity in the soil community, and that keeps in check soil-borne diseases like fungal rots in roots and nematodes and all of this kind of thing. So having that diversity in the soil community, which is part of soil health, helps with that as well. Not so relevant in grazing landscapes where you usually have that to some extent anyway. The final thing, which is really important for grazing landscapes in the north as well as farming landscapes, is you maintain a wider healthy landscape when you have healthy topsoil. And one of the key things with ground cover, which is part of soil health, is temperature at surface. So I've commonly measured up in North Queensland 60 to 70 degrees soil temperatures in early summer and late summer, and it's quite common. And if you've got bare ground, then the rate of evaporation of your water, but also the oxidation of your organic matter, you're losing organic matter as CO2. You're just burning that soil up basically. Less dust, less erosion, less extreme runoff, improved. You have more soil insects, and you might go, oh, yeah, well, what's so good about soil insects, Dave? Well, that increases nutrient cycling, but it also means you can have more bird life in the landscape, more lizards, all of that stuff. It all relates back to the soil community because that's at the base of the food chain in many ways. So a healthy soil helps with that as well. So the key thing is you might have a number of different soil types, or I know a couple of you guys have got just one soil type. If you're on the Downs country or the Mitchell grass country, it might look pretty similar all over, but they need, no matter how many soil types you have, they need to be in good condition. They need to be able to capture the water. They need to be able to cycle nutrients, etc., if you're going to make money out of them. And so that's what we mean by soil health. So I kind of asked you what a vehicle needs to be in working order. Does anyone want to have sort of a guess at what aspects the soil needs to have to be in good condition? No matter what soil type, what do you need to have to keep that soil working well? Does anyone want to have a go at any sort of specific things? Because I can tell you should have soil health and we can all sit in the pub and feel warm and fuzzy about it. But let's get specific. What are the specific things every soil needs? Thanks, Kieran. It needs structure. It needs plant roots. Yep. Thanks, Lachlan. So you can see here, it does, Colin, it does need trace elements. But again, to get those trace elements, I need plant roots and structure. So for me, that's the difference between fertility and soil health. So I can have, if I want to get the car to town and it's missing 2 wheels, putting fuel in the tank's not going to get me there. And that's the difference between fertility and structure and assets working condition. I need to fix the asset before I worry about the nutrient levels, but definitely trace elements are needed for plant growth for sure. But we're just talking about non-nutrient things. So structure, roots, and you can see here, this is the same soil. This picture here is a trial in Victoria on trying to get low fertility soils to be more productive. And you can see that they've done something over on this side here. They haven't added fertilizers. They've just changed the soil conditions or improved soil health. And you can see automatically it's growing more roots and the grass is basically it's using the water, and whatever nutrients and trace elements are there, it's using them. So both these soils have got the same level of fertility, but this one, because it's functioning better, is actually growing the plant. So it's an example for you. You can see the structure of it's improved. So here's a bit of a checklist for you. You guys started it off, but sorry, that first one there is a bit of a typo. So here's a basic soil health checklist for Northern Australia. And so I've just put a few things there: soil pH, soil salinity, what we call the cation balances, which we won't go through too much tonight because it is a little bit technical and takes a bit of time. But particularly if we need to, we can look at sodium on the cation balances, and then organic matter / carbon, and I'm using those two terms a bit interchangeably, and what I call the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So we're going to pick on those bottom two, and if we get time, we'll quickly look at pH as well. But basically, if you're in a grazing landscape up there in the north of Queensland, you really economically can only really change two of those things on the checklist economically, and that is the last two. You can influence organic matter and you can influence the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you're in cropping, you can certainly influence pH and some of the other parts of the cation, like the sodium levels as well, by adding inputs, soil amendments. But if you're in a grazing landscape, it's pretty much the bottom two that you're modifying directly through your management practices, because it's just uneconomic to add things usually. So let's have a look at organic matter, which is one of the big ones on your soil test and probably the most important aspect of any topsoil on planet Earth, whether you're in agriculture or a natural landscape. So what is organic matter? Quickly, just 2 minutes on a refresher on it. What is it and where does it come from? Well, it comes from photosynthesis, basically, and you can see here that this plant is taking in the sunlight. Well, what it's actually doing is taking in carbon dioxide from the air, taking the carbon out of the air, and it's energized by the sun, and from its roots it's taking in water and nutrients. So I've missed the nutrients part of that diagram, but it takes up nutrients and water from the ground and fixes carbon from the air, and that's the process of photosynthesis. And when plants photosynthesize, they create biomass. And here's that perennial grass again from that US extension work. And you can see that the plant on the right has a lot bigger biomass both on the top and underneath. And that's the key, is that vegetation, whether you're in a natural landscape, a grazing landscape, or a sugarcane paddock, there's biomass above ground and underground as well. And so plants, that biomass contains carbon from the air and the nutrients that the plant took up. So plants take up nutrients from the ground, they fix carbon from the air, and the two of them together make the biomass. So so that biomass gets fed to the soil over time. Some of those roots die and that leaf falls as litter, or cows eat it and then manure, all the rest of it. That biomass, as soon as it hits the soil, we call it soil organic matter. It's just plant biomass that's left the plant, basically. So it gets fed back to the soil as either litter or mulch on the surface, or dead roots underground. And I thought I'd just show you this picture here. Hopefully you can see it. It's a cane field near Cairns. And if you look carefully, I'll get the little squiggly doodah going again. If you look carefully, here's the original topsoil layer here. And you can even see this log, if everyone can see that log in there, that's been from where they originally cleared it. So what happened was, about 30 years ago, this was cleared for cane. It's at the bottom of the pyramid, if you know south of Cairns at all. And the guys moved soil around for drainage. So to set the paddock up for growing cane, they had to push soil around to get the drainage right. So this, you can see the original topsoil layer, And you can even see there's stumps of trees still from when they push things around. There's a stump, and you can see the dark layer of organic matter. And then they've come in and pushed subsoil on top to get it level. And you can see in the last 30 years, there's this development of this new layer of topsoil. So you can see it's getting darker in that area there. So it's reforming a new topsoil, which has got the organic matter from the cane and the trash and the roots of the cane. And if there was a cover crop going in there, I think they grow peanuts, although I'm not sure this paddock's had peanuts in it. So you can see that that new formation of a topsoil's happened, and that's just organic matter forming. So what happens to organic matter over time is it decomposes, and because all the microbes and things living in the soil, they're chasing their energy and nutrients, just like cows chase grass and kangaroos and wallabies chase grass to get their nutrition. The soil organisms and microbes, they chase organic matter because they're chasing energy and nutrients. It's the same. With grazing, we say energy and protein, but I'm just going to broaden it out from protein and say nutrients, because there's more to life than just protein. Even if Pete Evans reckons you should only eat protein. So you can see here that these calico strips that have been put into some cane fields near Tully, you can see the microbes have just chewed these two up, and they haven't chewed these two up as much. So it's just, that's what they're doing, they're eating. And so why do we bother about it? Why are we about to have a look at it on our soil test? Well, organic matter transforms mineral soils into topsoils. And if you remember back to those key functions, it helps with soil structure and therefore water holding capacity, and it helps with nutrient cycling, it helps with plant growth. The whole system, including plants, have adapted to living in an organic matter-based soil community. So you need to have some in there. And this particular paddock here is a vanilla paddock in North Queensland in the wet tropics. And this is 1 metre apart. And on this side here, we've got an organic matter of around 4 or 5%. And over here, where the vanilla's grown in a bed with mulched beds, it's 28%. And this is a former sugarcane field that they bought to convert to a vanilla farm, and the cane fields nearby probably have 3%. So you can see, depending on your management, you can have different levels of organic matter. All right, so let's jump into it. Grab your soil test. So you're looking for something on your soil test that tells you about your organic matter levels. So find your organic matter levels on your soil test, and then punch your answer into chat if you can. I'll get the soil test up in a minute, but see if you can find it. So if you found it, just punch something into chat. Hopefully you've all got the EAL sort of lab test that we're using. If you've got a different test, that's all right. Just let us know which test sort of lab you're using, but EAL is the one that we're mostly using here. 1%, thanks Lachlan. Yep. So as everyone see, I'm just finding it here on this example here. It's just near the top of the test. So it's about, I don't know, a few rows down, you'll find this thing that says estimated organic matter. So hopefully everyone's found it. You guys that don't have your camera on, if you can just give us the thumbs up if you found it, just so I know that you're all good and you're following along all good. 0.4%, Nigel. Yeah, so I guess, Nigel, is that organic matter or organic carbon? So if it's definitely the organic matter, then that's all good. And you can see here, this soil here is 10% because it's measured in percentage, as you can see, and the answer for this one's 10%. So if we have a look at your soils, I'll just clear this and jump into your soils here. So we're going down not far from the top. Here they are here. So we've got this first soil at 1.1, the next one at 0.92, the next one at 0.53, and so on, 1.6. We'll see who's got the lowest organic matter. Now, if I scroll along, if I can work out how to scroll. Here we go, 0.66. So Nigel, if you're at 0.4 organic matter, then you look like you've taken the chocolates. Just don't tell the real estate agent or the stock and station agent if you're going to sell. That's all, mate. Yeah, but that's, yeah, you can see that it's pretty low, Nigel, compared to the other ones here. Oh, you've got that other test. That's right, isn't it? That other one that we sent through last week separately. Yeah, now I'm with you. can't work out where I put that one anyway. So yeah, you can see here that everyone's got different levels of organic matter. You can also see, I'm not sure we've got it on this. Yes, we have. You can see that the lab has given us this thing that they're calling indicative guidelines. So they've given us these indicative guidelines, and some of your soils we're calling clay. They're sort of in here, medium to heavy textured soils, a lot of the soils in that area. So if we go down and have a look at that guideline for our organic matter, which is this column here, 21, you can see that they're giving us they reckon you should have more than 4 or 5% organic matter. So if you remember last time when we talked about using a soil test, one of the golden rules was to not always follow the benchmark on your lab's tests blindly. You've got to make sure that you contextualize it to your climate and landscape. And what is the difference between your landscape? Because the lab's just given you a generic benchmark, and they don't cover all rainfall areas of Australia, this particular lab. So if we looked at that other one that I've been showing you guys just as part of this today, well, here's one from the Northern Territory. You can see here the Northern Territory around Catherine. You can see the levels of organic matter there, 0.8, 1, 0.9. This is on very sandy soils, not on heavy soils, but on sandy soils, low fertility soils. Remember, in Northern Territory, they've got 3 types of soils. They've got white shit, yellow shit, and red shit. So this is a mixture of all of those soils. But you can see that they've all got low organic matter, relatively speaking. So the question is, what's a good level to have, say, in your part of the world? That's really the important question we've got to answer. So I'll just get open my thing again. So we've got it. You guys have all found your results. And so this is the key question. What is the good level? And the key thing is, don't always go just on the test results. And this is the tricky part of using a soil test, is trying to get a benchmark to aim for that's relevant for my enterprise in my climate. And that's sometimes a little bit tricky. But you do need to have a target. If you think it's important, and it is important for water holding, for structure, it's important for a whole lot of reasons, we need to have it. So I've given you Dave's dodgy benchmarks out of my shipping container lab. So it's 2% for northern cropping and 2 to 3% at least for northern rangelands grazing. So that's sort of what I reckon as a long-term aim. You need to be at that 2% organic matter. That's organic matter. So Nigel, they've given you the results in carbon. So I'm going to go over the difference between them in a minute. So Shane, you've got 1.5. So if that's percentage organic matter, Shane, then what I'm saying to you, I reckon you're a little bit low. You're not really low, but you're a little bit low. It's like we'd call it marginal. Whereas if you're under 1, then we're calling it missing wheels on the vehicle. So at 1.5, you've got one wheel that's shonky and needs replacing soon. But if you're 1.2 or 1 or 0.8% organic matter, then you're missing a couple of wheels. You need to fix it because you're losing potential water holding capacity. This is the key thing. Organic matter, as well as nutrient cycling. Organic matter is so important for soil, plant available water and water holding capacity of your soil. So I'll come back to yours, Nigel, just to show you the difference between organic matter and organic carbon. So just so it's clear for you. So if you remember, I said that soil organic matter consists of carbon and nutrients, because plants, that's how they've made organic matter. Their biomass is carbon from the air and nutrients from the soil. So that's what organic matter is in the soil. It's got both of them in there. So how they measure organic matter is they actually measure carbon. So Nigel, on your test, if everyone goes down towards the bottom of your test, just before the totals, you'll see that total carbon. So it's about 2/3 of the way down your test result if you've got an EAL test. Just give us a thumbs up if you've found that total carbon. Everyone's got it, hopefully. And then you can see here, righto, thanks Shane, you can see here that you've got total carbon of 0.63. So that's the carbon portion of the organic matter. So organic matter is carbon plus nutrients. So for you, Nigel, they've just measured the carbon, but we can calculate the organic matter by just multiplying that number by a factor, because we know the rest of the organic matter is nutrients and water. So we can kind of do a multiplier, and the number you use is 1.7. So Nigel, if you multiply your carbon number, if it's 0.4 by 1.7, which I'll get my phone going now on it just to help you out. Sorry, everyone, just bear with me. Get my calculator going. So I've got 0.4 times 1.7 equals 0.68. So Nigel, your organic matter content is 0.68. If that makes sense. So it's carbon times 1.7. And that's the general rule of thumb that they use to convert between the two. I would, Kieran. Yeah, that's definitely what we're going to go in a minute. So I gave you, that's why I said 2 to 3%. So at a minimum on sandy country, Kieran, I would say 2%. But some people will probably say, Dave, you're too idealistic, mate. 1.5% up in your part of the world. On your rainfall, on sandy soils that are low fertility anyway, and with that, some people might say, oh, 1.5% is enough, is all you can sort of try and achieve, really. But I'd disagree with that and say I reckon you can get to at least 2% even on sandy soil. What I've seen from the projects that I did up there previously, and just from my experience, I think, yeah, above 2% is even on the lighter soil. But it raises a really important point that lighter textured soils like sandier soils can't build as much organic matter as clay soils. So clay soils can hold more organic matter than sandy soils. And that's why your benchmark from EAL, if you remember this benchmarking thing that they're doing, you can see how their benchmark for heavy clays is higher than for sandy soils. They're saying you can get twice as much organic matter in a heavy clay than a sandy soil, if that kind of makes sense. And Kieran, the reason for it is that there's a couple of reasons. One is that sandy soils tend to be lower in fertility. So over geological time, they grow less vegetation. And the second thing is that the clay particles in the clay soil actually bind with organic matter, different parts of the organic matter. So you can hold on to more, if that makes sense. And there's less aeration, which means there's less kind of respiration. So there's a few reasons for it. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an answer. Okay, so I'll keep going here. So hopefully you guys can see that. I'll just get my thing going again. The key thing, the key challenge is to have a benchmark. And my personal opinion is, if you're on light sandy soil, grazing country, yeah, 2%. Heavier textured soil, at least 3%. And if you're in cropping, like if you're growing Rhodes grass hay, or you're trying to grow sorghum or something, and you're under 2%, even on lighter textured soils, I think you're going to struggle with your water, and you're definitely going to struggle with your nitrogen management. Because without going too much into it, your nitrogen lives in organic matter. So when you don't have any, it's very hard to manage nitrogen fertilizers. So if you want to find another benchmark from somewhere else apart from mine that I'm giving you, feel free. There's not a lot out there. The DPI has some stuff, but it is important to set a benchmark, just like you do with ground cover. We all know, ground cover is a benchmark. Well, it's the same for organic matter. I'll just show you one last test, just to give you one last example. This is a sugarcane field in North Queensland. I think I showed you this, guys, last time. And you can see here, just like yours, Nigel, they're only measuring carbon. They haven't converted it to organic matter, although we could do that. We could times it by 1.7. There's the result, 0.83. So this is a cane field near Cairns. And you can see that they've said to the grower, this is low. So they've said you're in the red. You need to fix it. But you'll notice that the lab or the agronomist hasn't been bold enough to give them a target. So if you tell me I'm not doing the right thing, or I'm not reaching what I need to, and you don't give me a target, well then how the hell am I going to improve things? So, I mean, you've got to have a target. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's easy and I'm not saying it's black and white. Sometimes the best thing to do is take an organic matter or organic carbon measurement in a part of your property that's going really well with good perennial 3P grasses. It's been grazed really well, not overgrazed, same soil type. Don't mix up your soil types, of course. And that will give you a feel for potential. And I have seen when I did the grazing land management training years ago with the GLM stuff with the DPI, they measured carbon underneath perennial plants and about this far away from them in the interrow, in the interspace outside the plant. And there's about a 3 times less organic matter in the interspace than there is under the plant itself. So where you take your soil sample from will influence this result. So if you were running around taking your sample from between all your plants, it's going to be lower. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? So you got to take it. If you've got poor perennial coverage and it's all bare ground, well, that's representative of the area. But if you've got good perennial coverage, you've got to try and take the sample from right next to the plant, like in close to the root of that perennial grass, because that's the relevant management that you're aiming for. Hopefully that makes sense, that sampling does influence this as well. But yeah, so there's another example for you of measuring carbon instead of organic matter. Okay, so that's organic. Once you've got your number, so Shane, if we say that yours is marginal at 1.5, if it's a moderate to heavy textured soil, we're saying it's marginal. So what you can do with your soil test is just make a note against that soil health indicator, in this case organic matter, saying it's like marginal or it's poor or it's good, and just I like to use highlighters. So if you want to get a highlighter from your office, farm office, if you've got those highlighter pens, just pick yellow or something for soil health indicators and just make a note which ones are good or which ones are poor. You can even buy smiley stamps that you give kids, at preschool. If they're doing good work, give them a smiley stamp or a grumpy stamp. So I'd put yours, just Shane as an example, that one at 1.5, I'd give you a kind of marginal smiley face. But if we had a look at some of the other ones on here, anything under 1.5, I'm calling grumpy. But I also want to know where you sampled. Did you just sample bare ground, or were you sampling right next to the base of the perennial grasses? That's going to influence the result. So that's why sampling is so important. And unfortunately, it's a short webinar series. But you can see why, where, and how your sample's pretty critical. So set yourself, rate against your benchmark, set your benchmark, get your results, compare it, give yourself a rating, and then ask yourself, if you're poor or marginal, what can I do to fix it? And if you're going well, what can you do to keep the soil organic matter where it is? So the question, what can you do? Well, the number one tool you can do in grazing landscapes is graze well. So that's strategic rest of the grasses at key times, evenness of grazing, not overutilizing the pastures, all of those rules that I'm sure you guys are more than familiar with, so that you get your 3P perennials. And even in timbered country like this near Catherine or Mataranka, the leaf fall from those trees is giving quite a lot of organic matter. It's also helping with nutrient cycling. So as long as there's not competition, as long as you've got that balance between trees and grass, then you've got grass right up to the bud of the tree, in which case you haven't got competition, it's actually a win-win. But yeah, where you have leaf fall, you're going to have higher organic matter as well. So what you can do in grazing is, of course, graze for perennial roots. And if you're in cropping, the real challenge in the northern cropping areas, like if you are thinking of paddocks for either hay or opportunity crops, is they're quite low in organic matter. Once they're disturbed, the organic matter gets burnt off by all the microbial activity and disappears as CO2 into the air. It gets breathed off basically, and it's really hard to rebuild it because you haven't got those perennial grasses. So particularly if you've got a Rhodes grass paddock, such as this one, and you're cutting it for hay too short too often, which you often want to do because you want to make money out of it. But what happens is the Rhodes grass roots get really small and they don't contribute organic matter into the soil. So you end up with poor organic matter in your soil. There's no structure. The water efficiency is really poor. So the pivot irrigator doesn't get the water in as quickly as you want it to. And the nutrients don't cycle. So you load it up with urea and you kind of get caught on this bandwagon and it's not very efficient. And I can show you an example of that here. This is a paddock in North Queensland, this soil number 4 that I've got up here. And you can see its organic matter, which is this line here. Its organic matter is 1%. Even though it's a perennial grass, it's getting watered all the time. So you'd think that a perennial grass like a 3P species or Rhodes grass, if you water it all the time, it'd have a big root system, but not under intensive hay production. So its organic matter is really low. And that's quite typical. That's actually high from what I've seen in different Rhodes grass paddocks. Okay, I'm jumping through things because I know we only got an hour and you can see it's a bit of a topic, but how's everyone going on that organic matter and just finding a number, finding a benchmark, and then going, all right, am I good or poor or in the middle? And what can I do? Well, grazing management's really your number one tool. If you're in hay production like this, yeah, it's trickier, but certainly cutting it a bit higher every now and again, especially in the active growing season, is helpful because it just gives the plant more recovery time to build root biomass. Okay, any burning questions or comments on using a soil test for organic matter? You can see that most soils will either have carbon or organic matter. So Nigel, if it only has carbon, then obviously your benchmark needs to be the carbon benchmark. But it just depends whether you're talking organic matter or carbon. If everyone's all good, I'll keep rolling on. It's really important for water and nutrient cycling and water holding. All right, let's keep going. Thanks, Lachlan. So let's look at another thing which you don't often hear about. It's called the carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it's just as important as the organic matter. And it's highly relevant, especially if you've got pasture decline. So if you've got pasture rundown and you're part of this is one of the main reasons why. So we'll just go into what it is and how I can measure it. So it's not only the quantity of organic matter that's important. So this is a forest soil here, and you can see there's a big layer of mulch, and then that mulch is turning into organic matter just below it. And there's lots of roots. If you look carefully, there's lots of roots, tree roots all through that. It's just a forest, but it's full of feeder roots of the trees. So I need a certain quantity of organic matter, but I also need to have quality. So just think of animal feed. When you're feeding cattle, you can have all the grass in the world you like, but if it doesn't have enough protein in it, you're not going to utilize that grass well. So that probably makes sense to most of you guys if you're grazing. So I can have lots of dry matter, forage dry matter, but if I haven't got the quality, it's not going to give a result for the cow's rumen. And it's the same for soil organic matter. You can have lots of soil organic matter, but if it's not of a certain quality, it won't be cycling in your soil. It won't be very functional for your soil. It's a bit like feeding cows hardwood chips. They're not going to, you can feed them all the hardwood chips you like, but then the rumen can't digest it and utilize the nutrients and energy in it. They just can't access it. So it's the same in the soil, is in that you can give the soil lots of organic matter or manage the soil so it builds up organic matter. But if the quality is not balanced, that soil won't function very well. So if it's too woody or too much lignin, then what happens is that nutrient cycling slows down. If it's too woody, too much lignin in that organic matter, so high carbon fraction, it actually slows down things. It gets a lot of fungi in it and it sort of slows right down. So that's really typical of a forest. So if you've got timber thickening up on country and sort of the country's becoming less productive, in my opinion, it's usually for 3 reasons: either water competition, sunlight competition, grass and tree. And the third reason is that all that woody organic matter in the soil starts to change the quality of your soil organic matter, and it actually slows down nutrient cycling. Trees are happy. Trees grow really slowly in a slow soil system, but grasses are not happy at all. They need things to be moving faster, just like the rumen of a cow. So that's an example for you when it's too woody. If anyone's done a Dick Richardson workshop, I don't know if Dick's been out your way, but he gets people to smell their soil litter, and if it smells like fungal, then it's too lignified. But everyone's probably seen or heard of buffel grass that's just rank, undergrazed, all lignin, shuts down the system, no nitrogen left in the system. You're turning it into a high carbon organic. You might have lots of organic matter, but it's not very functional. The opposite is too much nitrogen. So it's like when you spread chicken manure out on a field. The term we use is hot. We say, oh, the manure is hot because it stinks of ammonia. So that's an example for you where there's too much nitrogen in the organic matter. And when your organic matter in the soil has too much nitrogen, you're going to lose organic matter in the form of carbon dioxide and ammonia into the air. It's just really unstable. It's like Donald Trump's Twitter account. It's just really radical, and it's going to go anywhere. So you basically don't want it to be too hot either. So that might sound really strange, and it won't really happen in the grazing landscapes. Thanks, Colin. It's always, I like to get myself into a little bit of trouble. I didn't say Donald Trump. I said his Twitter account because it is pretty wild. I don't have anything against him personally, but so the key thing in northern paddocks that you're farming and you're using a lot of urea or DAP fertilizer and you have low organic matter, you can end up with too much nitrogen in the organic matter, and those soils are too hot. The organic matter is too fast to break down, and you're losing it all to the air. The CO2, the carbon goes off as CO2, and the nitrogen goes off as ammonium or a nitrous gas. So it's just way too hot. It's a bit like, I know it's very different than up your way, but down here in Victoria, New South Wales, southern New South Wales, on the dairy country, in spring, where you've got really green grass ahead of the cows, most of that feed goes straight through the animal. It's too digestible. So it's too much nitrogen in the feed, too much protein. It's too digestible. They can't use it. It's just too hot. So that's another kind of example. So the carbon and nitrogen ratio is really important because it determines the speed of the nutrient cycling, as well as do I have enough nitrogen in my topsoil. And that's the key thing with that rundown of buffel grass and stuff, is that over 10, 20 years, as they utilize all the nitrogen from the legumes or whatever, they start to the nitrogen content in the organic matter goes down, therefore the buffel grass can't get nitrogen, so it turns really lignin and it's just low grade feed, but the whole system starts to shut down. So have a look on your soil test, see if you can find it, see if you can hunt down your soil carbon and nitrogen ratio. All good. So Nigel, I don't think you're going to find yours on that test because I don't think they've measured total nitrogen. And they can do it, the lab can do it, but it's an extra you've got to ask for. In the EAL test, we got it. Lachlan, you've got yours. So yeah, it's down towards the bottom. So it's near, oh, now I've gone too far. It's near if I can come over to the edge here, it's near the total carbon. So we had a look at total carbon before. Total carbon, and you can see they've also measured in this test total nitrogen. So Nigel, on your test, they haven't done total nitrogen, which is, in my opinion, is the one gap that a lot of, not just that company, but a lot of tests do. You can ask the lab to do total nitrogen. They can do it. It's just an extra that you kind of ask for. And so you can see next to it or below it, they've got this carbon and nitrogen ratio. So hopefully everyone can see that. And you can see here, this first soil is 13:1. So what that means is there's 30 carbons for every 1 nitrogen in the soil. To put that in perspective, fresh green grass is about 13:1, like the leaf of a fresh green grass. Chicken manure, fresh hot chicken manure that smells like ammonia, would be about 6:1. Lots more nitrogen. Sawdust, hardwood sawdust that's sitting there on the ground, or bark from a tree, a eucalypt tree, like hard bark, would be about 300 carbon for every 1 nitrogen, 300 to 1. So does everyone sort of see that you've got different types of organic matter or plant biomass have different ratios, and it's important because it influences the cycling of nutrients and your nitrogen in your soil. The second one over here is 19 to 1, and I've got one over here at 20 to 1. I'm just going to go up to the top of that and see whose soil that is, if it's someone that's here tonight. So that 20 is Redland Park. So I'm not sure who owns that, but that's at 20 to 1. So you can see it's slightly more woody. That landscape's slightly more woody, or the organic matter's got slightly more carbon in it. Yeah, so Colin, yes, once it goes too high, and that's what I'll get to now, Colin, that yes, it is. Once it's too woody, it slows the soil down too much, particularly for pastures. Trees don't mind, but pastures, yes. So I'll give you the range. So you guys have found it. So good target. So a good target, in my opinion, is basically between 10 to 1 and 20 to 1. So as long as, Colin, you're between that range, then you're all good. It's a biological threshold, basically. Once you go over that, once you get 25, 30 to 1 carbon, there's not enough nitrogen for the bacteria. Bacteria can't metabolize because there's not enough. It's like cows. You know, you've got to get your protein to energy balance. Otherwise, the cows can't perform. When protein forms below a certain level, the cows start to shut down. Yep. So 10 to 1 and 20 to 1. So there is a pretty wide range. Looking at your soils on the handout that we've got, or the soils that you guys have, that everyone's within that range pretty much. You can see that some of them are at 9 to 1, which is sort of under 10 to 1. So they're starting to be a little bit hot, and I'm not sure what was going on there. But you have to then look at other things to get a holistic understanding. But as long as you're within that 10 to 20 to 1, it's not too bad. So at 9.6 to 1, we'll say, yeah, well, it's on the edge, but what else is going on? How much organic matter is there? So you can see that we're using organic matter, not just looking at organic matter, we're looking at the quality of the organic matter, not just the quantity, but the quality. So this first soil here has the quality is okay. And if we have a look up at the amount of organic matter, it's only got 1.1% organic matter. So it doesn't have very much organic matter. It's a bit low, but the quality is okay. So they're the two aspects of we're using when we look at this on the test. And Nigel, you can't calculate it, unfortunately. Here's another test because you haven't got total nitrogen measured. Here's another test from a different lab. This is another InsoTech test. And you can see they've done the total carbon. But we haven't got total nitrogen, so we can't work out the ratio on that test. And it just depends if they've measured that total nitrogen. But hopefully you can see that this indicator helps you get a bit more information about your soil organic matter. And it's quite important if you've got rundown pastures, because it might help you identify how low your nitrogen is in your soil organic matter. And I'll just show you one last thing off these soils. So if you remember back from last week, I showed you these 9 soils from across Queensland and New South Wales and even a Victorian ring in. And I think we looked at the total fertility in them, if you remember. So here's the vanilla soil. If everyone remember, I showed you that vanilla soil before. It has 28% organic matter, and the ratio of carbon to nitrogen, which is here, the quality of my organic matter, is still less than 20 to 1. So it hasn't become too woody. Kieran, if you added nitrate and ammonium nitrogen, it's not a proxy for the total. I can't go into it too much tonight, but basically in your soil's nitrogen pool in your soil, over 96% of it is in organic matter. Less than 5%, and it's usually 1 or 2%, is in the nitrate and ammonium forms. So if you add the ammonium and nitrate together, you're still only getting about 1 or 2% of the total N. The rest of it is in the soil organic matter, and that's why you can't add them two to give you a proxy. And it's it's partly why in sugarcane they don't even measure available N, because it's so inaccurate to work out fertilizer rates. And we might talk about it next week when we do nutrients, but in sugarcane they're legislated or regulated on nitrogen now, but they don't even measure ammonium and nitrate N because they know it's such a small part of the nitrogen story. They don't bother. Just to give you another side to it. Yeah, but you can't add them up. So you can see here the vanilla paddock, really high organic matter, no worries, really high organic matter. The ratio is still good. Have a look at soil number 4, my favourite Rhodes grass paddock from North Queensland. It's got bugger all organic matter, even though it's a perennial grass, and the C to N ratio is falling under 10:1, which tells me it's too hot. It's too much nitrogen around. So not only is it got very small amount of organic matter, but that organic matter is cycling too quickly. It's too hot. The microbes in that soil are going absolutely ballistic. They're eating everything up. It's too much protein, basically. And so they are breathing off the CO2 and the nitrogen is leaching and the whole thing's extremely leaky. And to solve the problem, they're putting more urea on to get the grass to grow. And all they're doing is adding too much extra nitrogen. I have seen a Rhodes grass paddock where this was 7.6:1, which is almost chicken manure. Fresh chicken manure. It's way too hot. You're just not going to have efficient use of your fertilizer, and you're never going to build organic matter. So you're never going to have water use efficiency in those paddocks. You can see how they kind of all relate. So that's a benchmark where pretty much for any agricultural landscape across the planet. Oh yeah, I did have a last one to show you on that test. Sorry about this, to jump around a bit. That soil number 3, which is near Stanthorpe in the granite belt. Soil number 3. It's a grazing paddock on a really low quality grass called African love grass. Some of you might have heard of it. It's a really, really crappy grass, high lignin, low quality grass. People hate it. You can see they've got heaps of organic matter in that paddock. It's a sandy soil, not very fertile, 7% organic matter. It's cooler and higher rainfall, obviously, than you guys. But have a look at the C to N ratio, 38:1. So that's telling us that there's just no nitrogen around. There might be lots of organic matter, and you can tell me that in the pub and I'll feel hormonal for you, but that's all shut down. You may as well grow trees on it because that's what it's suited for. And it's just this lignified, undergrazed love grass. And the only way you can make love grass productive is to get some legumes in it or graze it, keep it in that really green short phase. Otherwise, it's pretty ordinary. All right, I know I'm jumping around a bit, but hopefully you guys can see that the carbon and nitrogen ratio is another really important soil health indicator in grazing landscapes as well as cropping landscapes. And if you're outside that 10:1 to 20:1 or thereabouts, if you're at 9.6, I wouldn't stress too much, but yeah, it's pretty clear that if you're outside that ratio too much, your soil's not really functioning well. It's either cycling its nutrients too fast and it's losing CO2 to the air, or it's too slow and it should be under trees. No worries, Lachlan. You're welcome. Oh, yeah, I'm already over time. All right, I'm going to keep rolling. Okay, so that's the C to N ratio. How do you modify it? Well, in grazing landscapes, get some legumes out if you can. Like that's where bringing in some legumes content, Desmanthus or whatever it is, the stylos, whatever is appropriate. And grazing grasses in that right stage of growth so they don't over lignify. They're the two key things. The third thing people use is fire, of course, because fire does a reset and just gets everything back to the green stage. And in cropping, it's about using legumes in rotation as well as not using too much nitrogen fertilizer without going too far into it because I'm burning a bit over time. So they're the two key aspects that are really relevant for everyone, whether you're grazing or you're going to do some cropping as well. The last thing I'll just quickly cover off on, I know I've gone a little bit over time, or we're at time now, we started a bit late, is pH. And so have a look on your soil test for your pH number if you can find it. Just the pH. It's actually near the top of the EAL tests. You can see here if you've got an EAL test, it's up near the top. And you can see that the method they use in this test is 1 to 5 water. And then the different numbers, 7.3, 6.5, 7.6, 6.99. So you can see everyone's pHs are there. And if we go over to the benchmarks, you can see the benchmarks that EAL have given you. They're saying it should be 6.5, 6.3, all this sort of stuff. That's what the textbook will tell you. But we know that you're in an area of Queensland or Australia where there's a lot of alkaline soils. So, of course, we've got to use a benchmark that's more appropriate for your landscape, because often your soils are above pH of 7 and sometimes very much higher. And so that benchmark's not worth using. And so, yeah, just I've given you Dave's benchmarks as usual. It's 0 to 14, in case you're not aware of it. It's 0 to 14 is the scale, with 7 being neutral. So here's a very general benchmark. If you're in grazing up in your part of the world, up in northern Queensland, pretty much you're not going to go out and put out a product to change your pH. So the main reason that pH is relevant for you, in my opinion, is if you're thinking to sow new species of legumes, you need to know that they're adapted to the pH of your soil. You're not going to change your pH to suit the legume with lime or something, or sulfur. So you've just got to make sure you pick the right species that's suited to the soil type and the soil's pH. So that's why it's kind of important to measure your pH, but you can't really change it that much in grazing landscapes. In cropping, it's another matter, but again, choosing the right variety or crop that goes well on that high pH soils and the textures that you've got is really important. Saves you pushing S up a hill. You know, if you don't match your crop to the soil type, well, you're always up against it pretty much. So yeah, so there's a general range, but obviously there's soils higher than 8.5 up your way, and you don't really get acidic soils. There's not too many of them around out there. So again, you do your benchmarking thing. Do I have a smiley face, a neutral face, or a sad face? If I have a sad face, what it means is that I'm losing potential yield, or I've got to invest money to fix, whether it's pH or organic matter. When you have a sad face, you are losing potential income, either yield potential loss, or I've got a problem that I have to spend money on to fix. And what can you do to fix pH? Well, again, this is a bit outside your area, but it gives you another example. This is down home here near Albury. I think I'm allowed to go there. They've just locked us down in Albury. We can only go 50 k's from home at the moment. And I have a few clients I'm supposed to visit this week. But you can see here that they've limed. So there's 3 reasons people lime down home in this part of the world: is because it's tax time, because the neighbour did it, or because you're doing it to a pH target. And hopefully this guy here is doing it to a pH target, not just because he's got money to burn or spend minimized tax. So again, having a target, what's your target? You guys don't really modify it, but you do need to make sure if you're sowing legumes or new improved pastures that they fit the pH of your soil. Hence, it's good to monitor it. And if you're in cropping, again, just be wary what you're growing. Is it going to suit the conditions? So that's pH. Any questions or comments? I think I'll pull it all up all together. And then just open it up a little bit. So pH, organic matter, so carbon and nitrogen ratio, or organic matter quality. They're the 3 things we mainly covered. The other 2 things that do occur up there and is salinity, and I had one of them the other day. You get patches of high salts naturally, and or you get high sodium, which is this one here. So sometimes you get high sodium on what we call the colloid. No, Colin, you will get that high pH further south, like in the cotton country, the black soil country, say northern New South Wales, southern Queensland, even into central New South Wales. You will get high pH soils, but the high pH soils are definitely inland semi-arid soils across the world. No worries. Generally, the higher the rainfall, wherever you are on planet Earth, the higher the rainfall, the more acidity you get, because rainfall generates acidity. But yeah, all of that black cracking soil right through tends to be quite alkaline. And even subsoils, the topsoil can be acidic. Around Catherine and Darwin, I've seen the topsoil quite acid to neutral, and then the subsoil was like 9, and they pulled some of it up when they were mixing in a paddock, which was a big error because it got too alkaline. So yes, that is another issue which we probably don't have time to go over too much now, but I'll just quickly show you guys because it is an issue in patches. And sometimes you'll have a patch of your property and you go, why is that bare ground, or why isn't that growing things well, or why is that eroding really easily? And it can be not so much the Downs country, but other landscapes can be high sodium. And the way you look at that high sodium on a test, just really briefly, is something that we call the percentage sodium. And so I'll just get that for you. And it's on your test where you can see these percentages of what we call exchangeable cations. So on this test here, Nigel, your test will have them for sure, but just they might be laid out differently. But if everyone can see that calcium, and then the key thing you're looking for is percentage. So you can see percentage, and then you can see here that what they're talking about is the amount of calcium that's hanging out on that active colloid, or my CEC. So my CEC is 27 for this first soil, and 65% of that charge, remember it's a charge, has got calcium attached to it. And it's a really active part of my soil. So when we're talking high sodium soils, or what we call sodic soils, it's because the sodium gets too high on that charge. And if I have a look across on these soils, here's the sodium here, ESP. You can see these are all 0.94, 2.5, 2.7. So they're all pretty low. You want it to be under about 6 or 7%. But I just thought I'd highlight for you because that is an issue with some soil types in North Queensland inland. You can see here I've got one at 7.5. So technically that's probably starting to be a bit sodic. Rhodes grass is fairly tolerant. If you're opening a paddock for cropping and it's got sodium in it, I've seen a paddock near Richmond like that, and it can often be in patches. And you've got a pivot irrigator going, and it grows pretty well except in these patches. And you go out to the patch and you look at it, it's got a bit of grass, but it never grows well. And if you lift that, if you dig a bit out and feel it, it'll usually be saturated. But when you dig out the grass nearby that's growing properly, it won't be because it's using the water. So sodic patches tend to not use the water because the plants don't grow properly. So that's another sort of telltale sign, if you like, in the paddock. But you will get sodic patches in Rhodes grass paddocks where you clear paddocks, especially on the lighter soil types up your way. So just be mindful of that. How you fix it is gypsum, compost, or don't clear it. It's very problematic. So if you're really thinking to clear country for forages or whatever, and you know it's sodic, don't bother. Just leave it under native veg and graze it because they're very hard to fix once you disturb them. So my suggestion is if you've got a lot of sodium around on a paddock and you're thinking, oh, I want to improve this country, just leave it alone. It's not suitable. Last thing to remind you, everyone, is that you can't get the complete story of a soil's health off a test. So we've used a soil test to kind of do that checklist like you would a vehicle. We'll get on to nutrients next time. Yes, you need nutrients, but the amount of nutrients you need depends on what you're growing and how much you want to grow. No matter what you're growing and how much you want to grow, your soil needs to be in working order, whether it's trees, grass, crops, sugarcane. The common ground is they all need a functioning topsoil, and you need to also get out in the paddock with a spade. So look at things like ground cover, surface condition, roots, are the 3 Ps thriving? Is the grass declining? All of those things. So don't just go on the soil test alone. Use it holistically with everything else. And so, yeah, that's what we've covered. We've just used it because it can help you to start to identify what we call soil constraints. And that's the old-fashioned word from the Soil Conservation Service. And sometimes, whether you like it or not, a soil constraint is uneconomic to fix. So you've just got to live with that. And if it's a patch of your property that's really problematic, sometimes you just got to graze it really carefully, leave ground cover on it, and it's just uneconomic to kind of revamp. And I guess my word of caution with some of that northern country is if you are thinking to open some country up for cropping, just really do a good soil test that does and check all the aspects of soil health and see if there are any constraints like sodium or salinity and low organic matter, because once you disturb the soil with those major constraints, they can be very problematic to manage and you can lose money. You can burn money trying to fix them, or you can curse yourself because they're not growing what you expected them to grow. And sometimes people sell in their fertilizers and that's not their motivation, because the more inputs that you buy to fix your problem, that makes them happy. And I'm saying to you that as an ex-branch manager, and my job was to make turnover. So yeah, just be wary that soils that have some of these soil health issues, they are problematic. They may be profitable, but you just got to be really careful with them. So on that note, I'll leave you alone. I'm happy to take questions. I don't mind going a bit over time. It's all good by me. So I'll just open it up. But otherwise, I know we covered a lot of ground. But if you just think of that checklist and just benchmarking against your checklist, and I think that's it. I'll unshare my screen. No worries, Nigel.
With that. Sorry, have we got any questions? Like even Nigel, like I was thinking, say for you, like I'm wondering whether we even do a fourth webinar and, address some of the particular queries of some of the producers and why they've taken their samples.
Yep.
Like
happy to do that. I'm happy to do that now if there's any specific soil health, or we can do it at the end after we've looked at nutrients too next week as well, and then pull it together.
Yeah. Like that's one of the things I'd really like to address is, the reasons why we took some of the samples and what people are looking for out of them, or even just some of the comparisons of, we did a few soil samples just to see how this one compared with that one.
Yep.
And asking, why the difference is.
Yep. No, that sounds good.
So that'd be good. So whether we do that now or whether, or down the track, like I know, say, Lockie and Hannah have got some particular questions about what they want to do. Nigel's got a specific question.
Yep. No, look, maybe we do as just a follow-up, a wrap-up webinar where all we do is we get the questions from everyone and we have everyone's test, and then we can just do the webinar focusing on that.
Yep.
Well, I guess it's good if everyone gets a little bit of the fundamentals on using their test, because it'll make it easier to make decisions down the track too.
Well, yeah, that's right. And some of that I've put right up the top where I had, some of the reasons, like I had briefly some of the reasons behind what people were looking at.
Yeah,
but if we do
right,
to pull it all together at the end.
Yep. Sounds good.
Wouldn't you, Nigel? Cole? Shane, who's hiding away? Yeah. Cool. That'd be great.
Righto. Too easy.
Anyone got any questions? Nigel, Cole, Shane, Kieran?
No, it's 10 to 9 on a weeknight with soil tests. It's hard work.
Cole looks like he's going to go to sleep there. Righto. Well, thanks everyone. And I'm glad we did have it at 6:30. It's only 10 to 8, isn't it? Yeah. But thanks everyone. Thanks very much, David. Really appreciated it. So
no worries. No, you're welcome. Thank you.
And some of it is, you kind of go over it so quickly. I just want to kind of,
no, normally I do this over 6 months with growers in small groups. So, I'm not used to doing PowerPoint. So this is the first time in my life I do PowerPoint extension. I hate it. So I'd rather be in a shed with everyone.
Some of the more of the details, or I was trying to write up notes, but
no, look, happy we do a fourth one and we can just jump on to specifics, and I can that sounds good.
Okay, cool.
Righto.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks very much, David.
No worries. See you all next week.
Okay, bye.